even buy these. They gave them out at staff meeting this morning, just FYI.
They were given out free at staff meeting, so that's why I bought them here. I don't know who gave them out. Somebody had them free at staff meeting.
Okay.
So I'm going to get online here.
Okay, and we have a wonderful studio audience with us today, so make yourselves known. Come on, let's hear you. Come on. There they go.
There they are.
All right, good.
Okay,
Well,
so what I'm doing is, I'm getting online. Here we go.
For Valentine's Day, I'm surprised you didn't get me those famous sweethearts. But
Sweethearts?
yeah, the sweethearts from the New England Confectionery Company.
They're related, by the way.
I've never heard of them. The only sweetheart I know is at home.
Okay, so for those of you who didn't know, the sweetheart candy was not available this year at Valentine's Day, which has upset a lot of people. They're the little conversation hearts.
Oh yeah, I'm cut to the heart.
They didn't make them this year because that company went bankrupt and they were purchased by someone else.
Now I've got a broken heart.
But I happen to have 2 packages.
Yeah, but they're old.
Yeah, what's the expiry date on
Well,
them?
it says best by November 2018, but that's just best. It's sugar. It's compressed
Sugar doesn't
It's
expire.
got to be okay for you.
Hey, well, you hear this?
This is from last year's batch. I actually still had some.
Do you know what I did? I bought my wife a present for Valentine's Day.
All right, what was it?
So.
I bought her pot plants.
Pot plants?
Pot plants.
Yeah.
Did you get those in Colorado or?
Pot plants.
No,
potted plants.
Potted
yeah,
plants.
You
It's this
Australian.
Australian speak that, doesn't go over real well here sometimes.
Okay, so those are normal plants
plant.
that are in a pot.
Okay, so I shouldn't say pot plants in America.
No, that could get you in trouble in a lot of states.
Good, yeah, potentially.
Make you a lot of money in another
Potted
state.
plants.
I bought her these 2 little pots.
Succulents.
Yeah.
Whatever they are.
Those are succulents.
Those are.
And you know why I bought succulents?
They won't die.
The last time I
easily.
bought her a plant in a pot.
Yeah.
Can I say
in a
that?
pot.
say
Yes,
that.
you can.
Okay. The last time I did that, she killed it. And I thought, surely she can't kill succulents.
Yeah, usually they're pretty hardy.
They're pretty tough. They're pretty resilient.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Well, because it's Valentine's Day, I do want to recommend Dr. David Minton's an anatomist here at the ministry. A brilliant guy, actually. Great sense of humor. He's got a DVD on the cardiovascular system where he goes through the heart and explains all that. So this is the best possible day to buy a DVD on the heart, right? So I thought,
Hey, Bodie,
let's do that.
I'm really depressed because online I did a pun before. Because Bodie's known for his puns, just so the studio audience know. And somebody said, "Can you know Bodie Howard and don't try." So.
Somebody asked if these are fossilized.
They could be.
They're
So
hearing
one
that.
last thing before we get
One last funny
on to
thing.
the articles for today. This is a photograph that was taken for our 25th anniversary. This year is our 25th anniversary of Answers in Genesis, and the 3 founders, myself, Mike Zovath and Mark Loy, and Joe Boone, who's president under me as CEO now at Answers in Genesis. And we had a staff meeting and somebody took that photograph, and one of our artists decided we needed a product for Valentine's Day, so they took those photos and made a DVD. And then there's even a poster to go with it. This one here is Mark Loy.
Yeah, he's got a lot of hair.
Yeah, don't you like that?
he
That's
sure
the best
does.
rendering of Mark I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, you guys are so serious.
Yeah, so anyway, over to you.
All right. Okay. Pregnant woman murdered in New York. Cuomo's abortion law says her baby isn't a victim. So this is in light of the new what they call Reproductive Health Act that was just recently passed that basically it's now part of the state law that abortion for basically any reason up until the time of birth is now legal. But the thing that also did then was remove the fact that if you kill someone who is pregnant, it's no longer a double homicide because the baby is not considered a person.
That reminds me, a few years ago, there was a situation where a guy had gotten his girlfriend or someone pregnant, and he slipped her some pills to kill the baby, to chemically abort it.
Chemical abortion.
And he ended up going to prison for it because it was seen as murder. Would something like that actually still be considered murder here or not?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, you know what?
Strange
We're seeing, it's almost like a race to see which state can pass the most depraved laws.
I know.
In
That's
regard
exactly
to
right.
killing children in the womb. Actually, who would have thought we'd now hear on the news them talking about infanticide? They're even starting to use that word.
Yeah.
But can I make a point? Even though, these are horrible laws that were passed in New York and Virginia, they're trying to pass laws, and also New Mexico and so on. And people are aghast that they would want to kill children that are so close to being born, and or even just after they're born. But in reality, what is the difference between aborting a fertilized human egg and a baby just before it's born or just after it's born?
Nothing.
Do you know there's no difference?
Nothing different.
There's no. People get aghast at late-term abortions, but really, there's no difference, because a fertilized egg has the DNA from the mum and the dad. It's a unique combination. We're made in the image of God, 100% human. So there's really no difference, and we need to face up to that as well.
Yeah.
You know, Exodus 21, 22 through 25 indicates, you know, that somebody could be punished for killing a child that was in the womb.
For killing an unborn child.
And, you know, it's sad to see our country turn so far from
somebody here said, Ken, are you saying you're not the CEO anymore?
I said, no, he didn't say that.
No, no, Joe Boone is the president under me as CEO. I'm the CEO of the ministry. So there's a lot of people online, and they're coming from all over, and they're making a lot of good comments here.
All right, half of millennial Christians say it's wrong to evangelize. Now, we've actually done a lot of research here at Answers in Genesis on the millennials, and I know, Ken, you want to share some research.
Yeah, before you get into this is talking about millennial Christians. Well, first of all, we did research on the millennials that have left the church. It's important to understand, first of all, 2/3 of millennials have already left the church, and we did the research on that, published the results in Already Gone, and found out a lot of it had to do with the church not teaching them how to defend their faith, what they were taught at school about evolution and science and so on. But this particular research here is about the millennials that are in church, and we did the research on that. We did research on the 20s generation that attend church regularly and published it in a book called Already Gone. So let's understand, first of all, what these millennials that are in church believe, and then let's have a look at this latest research.
So because we've got 3 generations between Already Gone and Ready to Return with all that research that was done with America's Research Group, right?
Absolutely, and this is a very good behavioral science research group who did this. Do you consider yourself born again? 40% of millennials in church say they're not born again, so they outright say they're not Christians. Then, do you believe if you're a good person, you'll go to heaven? 65% said if you're a good person, you go to heaven. By the way, to me, that means the 40% figure is actually too low. Because some of them think they're Christian, but they're not. They think, oh, I'm a good person, I'll go to heaven. Should gay couples be allowed to marry? 40% outright said yes, 10% don't know. So 50% would not stand against gay marriage. So that's where these millennials are at. Now, let's look at this latest research.
What the article basically said is that many of them believe that evangelism is wrong. Nearly half, 47% think they, and you know, when you read the Great Commission, you think, how could you possibly, if you were a Christian, think evangelism is wrong? Because Jesus commanded us to do that.
That just means that half of them don't believe the Lord that they profess to follow. That's a big
problem. It's interesting that George Barna, who did this research, and the others with him who are doing this research, made a statement about millennials in general. I think it's very important for us to understand. They point to the rising cultural expectation against judging personal choices. Practicing Christian millennials were twice as likely as Generation X and 4 times as likely as boomers and elders to agree with the statement, if someone disagrees with you, it means they're judging you. And so we're at a stage now where I believe, because from my own experience and based on this research, our own research, these millennials that say it's wrong to evangelize, a lot of them would be saying, if you tell someone they're a sinner, you're judging them. If you tell them that homosexual behavior is wrong, you're being judgmental. If you tell them abortion is wrong, you're being judgmental. And so that's what I think they equate sort of evangelizing with.
And I worry too that a lot of them really aren't grounded well in their faith. I mean, obviously, if they believe you're a good person, you'll go to heaven. They don't even understand the Christian faith, and they haven't been taught apologetics. Many of them. That's really a problem. They're not confident in their faith, so they don't know how to answer the questions that people have about Christianity, about their faith, and so they don't even want to start the conversation because they're not sure how to deal with those kinds of things. I think that could be another issue.
The article also quotes quotes from some others here, from one person who says, I'm a millennial and this is pure evidence of the failure of the church to prepare youths to understand faith and speak out. Wow, we did the research on that.
Yep.
And the church, by and large, hasn't taught apologetics. It hasn't raised up generations to defend their faith. It hasn't taught them a biblical worldview. And in fact, it's interesting, as you go on this article, I'll tell you one of the almost terrifying things, and that is there's now a number of millennial pastors of mega churches, and they say that you've got a lot of these millennials going to these churches that have pastors as the millennial pastors. But you know, when you look at a lot of those churches, what are they teaching? Because they would compromise with evolution of millions of years, or they don't want to teach real biblical doctrine. It's all very shallow. It's all, you know, there's no apologetics. It's basically just to appease today's culture so that you're not coming across as judgmental, what they would call judgmental. I tell you, this culture we're seeing catastrophic change before our very eyes.
It is.
And a lot of it's the failure of the church.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. This research was done by Barna Group, but it was also with the creators of the Alpha Course. For those who are not familiar with the Alpha Course, that was Nicky Gumbel and all that. You know, he was over in the UK. And, you know, I remember when they first came out with the Alpha Course and all that, they received a lot of criticism because they were open to evolution, millions of years, Big Bang, and things like that, you know, which just that just undercuts the very foundation of the gospel. And I struggle when I hear these kinds of things and I read these kind of things, because so many people in churches and in ministries are undercutting their own foundation by ignoring Genesis.
Well, and it says here too, one of the things, it says a lot of Christian millennials are being catechized by their colleges, not churches. Okay, in other words, they're being indoctrinated by them, and many of these colleges, even Christian colleges, are compromised on the authority and truthfulness of God's word. And so they're not even getting a good education on many of these things, even from a Christian perspective.
And one of the things that's happening on the colleges, whether it's Christian or non-Christian colleges, this whole gender issue is actually becoming a dominant issue, and it's really causing major problems.
Yep.
And they're compromising on that issue. Hey, somebody said here they're from Moscow, not Moscow, Russia. It's Idaho. Moscow, Idaho. And they said, any updates on the Tower of Babel? I'm going to be coming over in May. Well, the Tower of Babel is in the master plan for there at the Ark Encounter, so I can officially announce that it's not finished.
Or not started.
That's biblical. Oh, no, we haven't started yet.
Yeah.
But that still means it's not finished, right?
Somebody wants to start writing us $1 million checks, we can move a little quicker on that, you know?
Actually, this year at the Ark Encounter, in April, we're opening our new big conference center, 2,500 seat multi-purpose center that will have presentations by our speakers during the day. We'll have concerts. We'll show movies.
The women's conference is right around.
The women's conference is going to be there in April. And we've also got a big expanded part of the zoo opening, which is going to be spectacular. A walk-through kangaroo area. You can actually walk through with the kangaroo and the emus, and we've got sloths and all sorts of.
That's the Australia area, right?
Yeah, of course.
Can't imagine why we don't have
that. So lots of things are happening there at the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum. We just opened our 4D theatre recently, and we continue to expand and upgrade the Creation Museum.
Somebody on here said, I'm from Southern California. I'll see Ken next Thursday in Anaheim, and I have invited all the pastors and many leaders in my church to hear Ken speak.
That's right, I am speaking next Thursday night. It'll be on our website. If you go to the answersingenesis.org website and look up the events page, you'll see I'm speaking in California. Do I need a passport to get into California?
You might. I don't know. They might not let you over the border, Ken.
I'm worried they won't let me out. They won't arrest me for saying that Genesis is real history, will they? Or that marriage is a man and a woman. Am I liable to get arrested in California for that?
I don't know.
We'll see. All right, the Milky Way is totally twisted. Okay, so this is really kind of a, it's not necessarily easy to tell the shape of our galaxy since we're in it, but this is a study that they've done to try to understand that we're actually more of a twisted S than a total spiral.
So this is talking about the astronomical stuff, not the candy bar.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, I talked to our astronomer, Dr. Danny Faulkner, a little bit more about this. And one of the things about these galaxies, yes, this is a little twisted. Think of it kind of going like almost like an S shape. And it is difficult for us just to look out there and see it because we're in the middle of it.
Right.
Where we can look out at some of these other galaxies and we can see those. Andromeda, for example, if you look at it, it's actually got a little bit of this as well. So it's not a big deal. We do see this among some of the others. And there are some, potential factors that might be putting some gravitational waves on this, little mini galaxies and things like that. So it's not a big deal. Now, another thing, when I was talking to Dr. Faulkner, we went back and we looked at the original paper on this. They actually had two different data sets on this. One of them, they actually looked at the infrared, and the other, they looked at the visual. And in both cases, it was giving that curvature.
So now we know the shape better.
So the Milky Way is twisted.
Yeah,
a little bit, yeah.
You know what? I think that's, I know we don't get into politics, but I think it is representative of politics in Washington, D.C. What do you think?
Anyway, but one of the things that we always talk about with these types of galaxies, especially spiral galaxies, is that they can't be billions of years old because the arms, you wouldn't see it as a spiral. The arms would be all wound up, and you wouldn't see it as a spiral. So they can't be billions of years old. They have to be much younger than that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It seems like this research is moving at light speed.
Okay, there's one pun for the day, maybe, or maybe that's the second one. Okay.
To introduce this next one, can I read your story?
Well, that's what it is. So
okay.
Sure.
Okay, I want to read you a story. So going back 4 million years ago, as the human ancestor began walking on two legs, our human ancestors were awkward creatures. They weren't good in trees like chimps, but they weren't necessarily good on the ground either. So what did the first upright walking apes in our lineage do to make them successful? At this stage, there was already a small increase in the size of brains. How were they feeding their brains? Well, our early ancestors wielded rocks as they forged an open grassland. After a predator had finished eating a large mammal, these upright apes explored the leftovers by smashing them and discovered the marrow hidden in the limb bones. And then, because of that, they had more fat than meat, and their brains were able to evolve to the size we are today.
Yeah.
The end.
So we all said when we read this article that it's nothing but story. And go to the next slide so they can see it. And that's exactly what it is. So the idea is that, how did our brains get bigger? Because chimps' brains are much smaller, so how did our brains enlarge? So they say, eating meat wouldn't be enough because they would mainly be eating lean meat.
Protein.
And so they don't have the fat or the caloric intake that you need. So because they're dumb brutes, right, because they weren't quite human yet and they're on their way to becoming human, that they obviously could take rocks and smash bones to get marrow out, which is much fatter, and would provide them the caloric intake that they needed to be able to get larger brains and become human.
And in this article, they said, do you know why there's no evidence of that yet? Because scientists have been looking in the fossil record and they haven't been looking at all the smashed bones and the bits and pieces of bones. Now, if you look in a different way, you'll see there's a lot of smashed up bones because obviously the ape men were smashing bones to get out the marrow to have the fat so that their brains could evolve. So we could be here today with big brains and look back and say, oh, I know what happened. We got big brains from eating marrow from smashed bones.
So the gist of the article is, if you have a fatty diet, you have a bigger brain. A taste for fat may have made us human. Fat chance at that one, I think.
Does this mean you shouldn't have people who are vegans because evolutionists shouldn't be vegan, right? Because they needed fat and meat to evolve bigger brains. So if you're a vegan, is your brain going to devolve to smaller?
From an evolutionary
perspective.
Don't
comment on here, people. I don't want to hear it.
Well, okay. They started saying our ancestors likely began acquiring a taste for fat 4 million years ago. First off, that's imaginary time. The first time, according to Scripture, anyone was allowed to eat meat was after the flood, when God gave the new covenant with Noah and his family that they were first permitted to eat meat. That's in Genesis 9:3. Now, there may have been people eating meat before that. It says back in Genesis 6:12 that all flesh had corrupted itself, so some people may have been vegan.
But whatever was there, though, was adequate and sufficient. They didn't need to eat meat. So.
Correct. So,
somebody here made this is a very insightful statement. Did the people who wrote that article not eat enough bone marrow yet? They're obviously not very brainy.
Yeah.
So I agree. They didn't eat enough bone marrow to get bigger brains to be able to go back and...
But it's just the extent that, I mean, you just see that, that's ridiculous. That's just total storytelling. They don't have any basis for that.
Do you realize if
there.
a science teacher in the public schools in America, if a science teacher wanted to use this article from Science Daily in their public school classroom and tell their students that, he would be applauded by scientists.
Oh, yeah.
But if you were to tell your students that God created and humans have always been humans, you'll be sued for introducing religion into the class. Actually, this is a religion.
Yeah.
It's a religion of evolution. They're committed to their religion.
You know, it's interesting how, they say because these wild animals have such a lean meat, you have to go in and bust the marrow up and try to get something fatty. And that actually leads to what's called protein poisoning if you eat nothing but lean meat, and acute malnutrition. That's actually called rabbit starvation, because that actually occurred with some Arctic explorers who ate exclusively rabbit, which was way too lean. So, I mean, that was apparently a hair of a problem.
Okay.
Let's jump on to the next one.
Hey, somebody on here said, we got the B team to give their ages on Monday. Think the A team will today. That's because the B team is a lot younger.
Hey, we're all around 29 plus something.
Yeah.
Hey,
that's right.
Do you know what? With age comes wisdom.
That's right. And so we know
they might be 3 times younger than us in the B team, but we are at least 20 times wiser.
Hey. And
they're giving us bad stares here.
I have 0% body fat too.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Okay.
But this means we don't have to worry about eating fat in our diet, so we can go to restaurants.
Yeah.
I usually cut a lot of the fat off.
All right. This is based on a study that's been done by Pew Research called Darwin in America. And so what they kind of do is it's sort of a historical look at the creation, evolution sort of controversy that's been occurring here in the U.S. Over the last several years. And so when we first read this article, we're like, oh my goodness, there's so many things we could comment on in here. And, they act like, again, that evolution is everybody accepts it, all the scientists know it's true, and, creation isn't, and that's why it's taught in schools and not, that's why evolution is taught in school and not creation.
Oh,
so,
my.
I don't know where you want to start.
Hey,
let's
start with the first sentence, because the first sentence was just terrible in and of itself. Almost 160 years ago, after Charles Darwin publicized his groundbreaking theory on the development of life, blah, blah, blah. Okay, hold on a second here. Evolution was around long before Charles Darwin.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
The Epicureans believed it. This was one of the Greek mythologies that were out there. Paul actually argued against the Epicureans back at Mars Hill in that particular
Darwin just popularized
place.
a particular mechanism.
That's right. He popularized a mechanism.
Yep.
His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, wrote a book on evolution. It was involved in Lamarckian evolution.
Well, he drove around with a carriage that basically had on it in Latin, from everything, we came from shells. Everything came from shells.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's first sentence. Now we can keep going.
But here's the thing. Here's this multi-page document from the Pew Research. And there's so many misrepresentations in it and so much misinformation. And for instance, it says here, evolution is as established in the scientific community as the theory of gravity.
Nope.
So in other words, the theory of gravity is fact and evolution is fact. Well, what's the theory of gravity, Bodie?
Well, the law of gravity.
Right. Now, there's a difference.
This is the law.
Okay. The law of gravity, we can repeat, we can describe it. You think back
so
to
that's
Isaac
fact.
Newton and
you
Albert
observe. You can observe what the law does.
That's right. Now, I remember Eugenie Scott used to use this argument too. Oh, you got the theory of gravity, you got the theory of evolution. Hold it. The theory of gravity is much different than the law of gravity. They just equated terms here, which they shouldn't have. The theory of gravity is about what exactly is gravity. Is it a graviton? How does that work in the quantum levels, and how do you deal with that with regards to general relativity? The math on this stuff is just crazy. We have no field theory of gravitons that can even be calculated properly. It just doesn't match up.
But
that is crazy stuff.
But we can't observe gravity. That's a really big difference between that and evolution, because we can actually observe. We're all observing gravity right now, because otherwise we'd be floating in the air, right? I mean, it's.
But see, evolutionists. Here's the thing. Here's how they indoctrinate kids. They say we do observe evolution. We see new species forming. But speciation is
That's
not
speciation.
evolution.
That's right.
You have speciation within a kind, but that's not evolution.
Right.
But that's how they indoctrinate students.
And I wouldn't even call evolution a theory. I don't even like using that
Yeah,
word.
it's not.
It's an idea, because a theory in science has evidence to support it and back it up. That's why it's got to the level of theory. Evolution doesn't. So it's just an idea.
Right.
And you know,
Even
there's so many
the
other...
theory of gravity probably wouldn't even be classed as a theory because there isn't anything behind
There's
it.
so many misrepresentations in here. They give a lot of wrong information about the Scopes trial and what really happened there. And then they talk about these court cases in America that supposedly banned the teaching of creation in public schools. And they mentioned, for instance, one of them, Edwards versus Aguilard in 1987. That was a Louisiana one. The atheists quote that all the time. And they say that this is one of the ones that struck down the teaching of creation. Actually, the Louisiana case was struck down a law that said that they had to mandate the teaching of creation. It was the mandating of the teaching of creation that was struck down. They actually said in that court case, they actually said that you could teach creation as long as it has secular intent. In other words, as long as the teacher didn't say you have to believe this. But see, again, there's so much misrepresentation, and that's how the public get led astray.
Although I will say there was one part in here I did agree with, that they talked about that the idea of Darwinism in a scientific sense then also leads to Darwinism in a social sense, and that it was a foundation for the idea of eugenics, which promoting there are certain individuals that are better than others, and we need to promote the reproduction of those individuals over others. And so they were at least honest in that sense. You don't see that very often, but it is true.
The other thing they did in here was imply that people who are Christians, creationists, blame evolution for abortion and racism and so on, but that's not true. Or gay marriage. What we're saying is sin is the cause of those, but evolution has caused many people to reject
make it worse.
God's word, which means if there's no foundation for morality, it's all subjective and relative, and therefore why not abort babies or why not gay marriage?
Well, Darwin's
that's the connection.
views are ultimately racist in their viewpoint. In the paper here it says, in November 1859, Darwin published, quote, "On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection," unquote. Actually, that's not the whole title. If you keep reading the rest of the title of that book, it's For the Preservation of Favored Races. And his follow-up book, The Descent of Man, with regards to sexual selection here, that book specifically, you start reading the details in there, it's inherently racist. You have higher and lower races. And he went so far as to put the Caucasians on top and that they would exterminate everyone else. That's where eugenics and a lot of this stuff was coming from.
I mean, Darwinian evolution is inherently a racist philosophy.
It is.
Oh, yeah.
Yet you won't hear out there today the secularists saying we should ban Darwin from the schools or anything like that.
Well,
By the way, go on.
Well, they even said in here, like they're talking about a recent case in South Dakota where they said they would allow teachers in the state's public schools to present students with both the strengths and weaknesses of scientific information. Well, that's a good thing. You should want to do that because science is not some holy grail that is never to be questioned. That's how we learn about our world and understand things. And yet they don't want that because they don't want evolution to be questioned.
If evolution is such a fact, as they say, why would they even be worried about students hearing about creation or anything else? Because students would say, well, that's obviously wrong.
And why would they pass laws to protect it if it's
fact,
so obvious?
They have to pass laws to protect the teaching of evolution and to stop students even hearing any of the problems with evolution, because they know if they allowed students to think correctly about science and the difference between observational science, you observe, test, and historical science beliefs about the past, students would realize evolution is a belief. That's what it is.
Yeah. And here it says, by the 1870s, American religious leaders and thinkers had begun to consider the theological implications of Darwin's theory. Actually, by the 1870s, it was already ingrained.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the Christian colleges across this country fell in the 1870s. Think of Harvard and Princeton and Southern Illinois, University of Illinois, all these different colleges that were largely Christian, there to train pastors, teach in theology and so forth, largely fell to a secular worldview during the 1870s.
Yep.
Hey, you know how we had that article just a little while ago about evolutionists saying that, primitive ape men had probably ate fat from bones so they could get bigger brains? Well, somebody here made I think a very insightful comment. So the A team has been eating fat longer than the B team.
That's true. Okay.
And we've got two of the B team in the audience today. And obviously, people are starting to recognize
that's
why
good.
we're called the
That's
A-team. I understand that.
Okay.
All right.
All right. It's not just Northam. Republicans must confront the bigotry of the Pences, too. So this is an opinion column that occurred in the Washington Post. And basically, I'm assuming if you've been keeping up with the news, you know what's happening with the governor of Virginia and how he's, they're wanting to say, well, because of this picture in his medical school yearbook that he should resign because it was very racist. And so, but what this guy is saying, well, if that's the case, then Pence, Vice President Pence and his wife, well, he needs to resign. She needs to give up her teaching at this Christian school because they discriminate against homosexuals.
Hold on.
And when they say discriminate, what it is,
Right.
Mike
Or they hate
Pence's
them.
wife teaches at a Christian school she's been involved with for many, many years. That is a Christian school that believes marriage is a man and a woman. But these days, as soon as you say that, they call you homophobic.
And that's actually called religious freedom. That's what that is.
Yeah.
Here's what I don't get. I mean, this very person is criticizing, the Pences and whoever else here, and opposing them. Isn't that discrimination against Christians?
It is.
I mean,
It's
that's very
intolerance.
bigoted on his part. That's actually self-refuting right up front. If hate equates with somebody disagreeing with someone, well, he's disagreeing here.
Well, in this
here,
article,
here.
which is from the Washington Post, okay, it's an opinion piece in the Washington Post. Listen to this statement. No one is advocating a law requiring a manual Christian to practice tolerance, both in its pedagogy and its hiring practices, but the First Amendment that it guarantees the school's rights also gives us the right to criticize. It's simply wrong to foster a belief that homosexuality and same-sex marriage are immoral. Well, wait a minute.
That's total double standard right there.
In the one hand, they're saying Christian schools are not tolerant because they believe marriage is a man and woman. Then over here, it's saying it's wrong to say that homosexuality and same-sex marriage are immoral. In other words, they're intolerant of what the Bible teaches.
Right.
Double standard. That's what
Well,
that
and
is.
they say, people should have a right to criticize. Well, true. So I'm not against that. But then to turn around and say, but this is wrong, that's not allowing for a diversity of ideas and opinions on this. So.
One of the things that says in here, the Bible is used to justify slavery. Correct, some people tried to do that,
Sadly.
wrongly, by the way.
Wrongly, but...
And in my own time, racists cited this or that biblical passage to assert that racial segregation was precisely what God intended. And what do they refer to? The curse of Ham.
Yeah.
Is the curse of Ham in the Bible?
No such thing.
No such thing. It's not there. So I don't know where they're getting that from, but we have done research on the curse of Ham. It actually comes from a Mormon doctrine. It does not come from the Bible, and it actually wouldn't, we would oppose that sort of thing. And yet, you see what they're doing. They're using bad arguments here in this instance.
The only curse of Ham I have to deal with is working. Oh, never mind.
This is called the Ham blessing.
Did
I make a misstatement before and I said 2 of the A team are here? I meant 2 of the B team are here. Somebody said I had bad math. 2 of the 8. I don't know what I said.
But we've got some really great comments on here. We just don't have time to read all of them.
There are
But
some
I
great
encourage you to
comments,
look at the comments.
but we do go through the comments and we look at those and we appreciate everyone making them.
I keep missing what's coming through here.
It's somebody here was talking about, said my pastor was undecided on the origins of man until he heard Ken talk in the 90s. Now our church is solidly based in the truth of God's word, including Genesis. I hear about that from all hear testimonies like that about all our speakers. And you know what? Answers in Genesis had incredible impact on the church and others in America.
Oh, and someone said they said Ken Ham. I told Brian Osborne he has a cooler accent.
He's got an American accent. That's not cooler. That's warped.
He's got
just
a
like
Tennessee accent.
just like the Milky Way. It's twisted.
Okay, all right. We are out of time today. We will be back next Thursday because Monday is a holiday, so President's Day. So we won't be here Monday, but we'll be back next Thursday, and we'll see you then.
All right, blessings.